Well, good afternoon. I'm William Murdock. I'm the Executive Director of the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. Our acronym is pronounced MORPC, from Columbus, Ohio. And before I get started, I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Jim Hassinger, for inviting us today. If you don't already know it, and I'm guessing that you do, Dr. Hassinger is one of the leaders in regional councils across the country. Working at NARC and other places, he's been a mentor and a friend to many of us, including myself, as we try to work in our own region. So you've got somebody special here leading your organization here in Southwestern Pennsylvania. So what I want to talk about today is innovative mobility, and the agenda says Hyperloop, and Hyperloop is just a part of it. So what I want to do is set the context for what our region is working on that connects to your region when it comes to innovations in mobility and technology. Let's see if I can do this. There we go. So we've had our speakers today talk about embracing change. Change is coming at us, especially in a transportation world as an MPO. This is something every day, the Ubers, the Hyperloops, the smart mobility, the new technologies around mobility. This is something that is coming at us quickly, and quite frankly, we look towards Pittsburgh as one of the innovators and leaders in the country in the smart mobility space. As a regional council that thinks in long-term plans, I think Eric Zimmerman from NARC mentioned this, we do 20-year plans, and the last 20-year plan we did was 2 years ago, and that was before smart mobility hit us, and it was before Hyperloop. So within a year, the landscape had shifted. So this is something that we're trying to get in front of and in our region. So if you're not familiar with Central Ohio and the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, we're the regional council for a 2 million person region in the heart of Ohio. So much like SPC, we work on sustainability and transportation. We work with all sizes of local governments. We work on urban transportation. We work on rural transportation. And I know that your chairman mentioned it earlier. Just last week, we found out that our metropolitan statistical area is now the largest in Ohio. So we've got the largest city, the largest county, and the largest MSA. And we're a very quickly growing area. Not quite like in Austin, not quite like a Charlotte, but we're growing about the same as Portland or the Bay Area in California. So our population is continuing on an upward trajectory, and this only increases the pressure when we think about changes in technology. So part of the way we think about innovative mobility in Central Ohio is to make sure we've got a comprehensive strategy. It's easy to get caught up in some of the really fancy technologies, the new technologies, but we're trying to look at this comprehensively in the Columbus area. We have a saying called the Columbus Way, which is public and private and nonprofit working together on how to integrate these technologies together. The idea here is we all want to be looking forward toward how can we embrace change, how can we get in front of it, and how can we check egos and silos at the door to look at this new technology. Part of how we're doing that as a regional council is something we call a Smart Region Task Force. We have a group of local governments from rural to urban looking at this mobility issue and how to make it real. For us, we've got a lot of rural and smaller suburban governments looking at smart cities saying, what do we need to do? How can we not get left behind? How can we connect our infrastructure to it? That's something as a regional council we want to do the best we can to leverage some of these bigger efforts to look at policies, to look at strategies for local governments, and quite frankly, look at our road infrastructure as something more than just moving cars. You know, we've gone through the complete streets revolution where you look at bikes and transit and everything on roads. We're going through a smart streets evaluation right now looking at data and fiber and data-enabled infrastructure when it comes to smart mobility. That's something that we're just beginning to tackle. It was mentioned that Columbus was the smart city winner. Again, we in Columbus are working really closely and admiring what's going on at Pittsburgh with our initiative. The Smart Columbus Initiative is about three main things. It's about connected vehicles, it's about emerging technologies, especially electric vehicles, and all of this tied together to enhance human services. So we're really working, again, not to get caught up in the technology, but to see how it can be leveraged to improve social problems in Columbus, to improve our business climate. And that's what Smart Columbus is all about. They're just about a year into this effort, so there should be a lot more coming from that soon. In our rural areas, we've got another major project that's becoming known nationally as the US33 Smart Corridor. This idea here is to connect Honda's North American headquarters to downtown Columbus through rural, urban, and suburban areas. We've got quite a supply chain there, and we're looking at how can we connect freight and these new technologies to the US33 Corridor to invest in that. Between just these two initiatives, we've attracted public and private investments of $200 million in this corridor and almost $500 million in the Smart Columbus Initiative. It's not just about investments in technology. We're also looking at ways this can affect our planning as a region when it comes to transit. And the first way is we're jealous of other more mature regions that have light rail systems or entrenched transit systems. We're still learning from that here in Columbus. And what we're looking at is looking at corridors a different ways. So we're growing. We want to be making sure we're using technology and growth to look at corridors where we can invest. We're also looking at how we can bring in the private sector to help us use transit differently. And we're really proud of this initiative that's kicking off in the middle of this year, where we've worked to get almost all of the property owners in downtown Columbus to work with the private sector, to work with Columbus Transit Agency and us as an MPO to provide free transit passes to every employee downtown, so about 45,000 workers. The idea here is we've got to get in front of this revolution of mobility, but we also have to help those who depend on transit to make it cheaper, to make it easier to get on, and that's a major initiative that we'll be looking forward to this year. We're also the hub for ride sharing and looking at new technologies there. It's tough to compete with the Ubers and the Lyfts who have so much investment in this, so MPOs across Ohio are also looking at ways that we can connect that technology to existing technology on ride sharing and really help get workforce to work. The last thing we're looking at before I get to Hyperloop is we've been really focused on passenger rail and freight rail improvements. Pittsburgh's not on this map, but that's because phase one of our efforts to connect Columbus to the passenger rail network in the country is to connect to Chicago as the largest region. We've been working on this for several years with the communities and MPOs along the route. Pittsburgh was always considered as the phase two of that. And so that gives you the context for when we think about Hyperloop. This is not a one-off initiative. This is something that connects to a lot of what we're doing in innovation around smart mobility in Central Ohio. We are looking at this through the lens of the mega region concept. And I know Sarah, your freight planner, was at a conference talking about this in Columbus just last month. We're all in the Midwest mega region, and when we think about how can we thrive together, in Columbus we're looking at how can we connect to the innovative city of Pittsburgh and the largest metro area in the Midwest, Chicago, through a Columbus-Chicago, Columbus to Pittsburgh connection. So when we looked at that route, we looked at the efforts in passenger rail. We were approached by the private sector in our community to look at Hyperloop technology. And if you're not familiar with this, Hyperloop is an idea that Elon Musk birthed a couple years ago. The technology is about 700 miles per hour using maglev and vacuum tubes. It sounds fantastical. It is, but there are several companies working on this, significant investments around the world looking at how this technology can move freight and move people. We think when we were approached by the private sector, we said, okay, well, let's look at this. What could the potential be if we were to connect Pittsburgh and Columbus and Chicago at that speed with freight and with passenger? That's where the 14-minute number comes from to get to Pittsburgh. So if you want to see the Penguins beat the Blue Jackets really badly, you can get there even faster. The Blackhawks I can't help you with, but the idea here is think how speed could make such a big difference in our economy. So we looked at the private sector and we said, help us, let's figure this out. And we competed in something called the Virgin Hyperloop One Global Challenge. Virgin Hyperloop is the largest company that's working on this. There are several others. Elon Musk actually let others take the idea and run with it. The company we're working with is Virgin Hyperloop One. Richard Branson is the chairman. They've invested significant resources into this, and they held what was called a global challenge about 2 years ago, saying what corridors should they look at to invest. We proposed Pittsburgh, Columbus, Chicago, and out of 2,600 applicants in a year-long competitive evaluation, we were actually one of the 10 corridors globally that this company wants to look at and invest. What that means is we can start looking at realization of the technology in the corridor and evaluation of rights of way and other things. So we are, as one of those 10 corridors, we've got their full attention. And in fact, we were able to see their test site back in January. This technology is coming. It's a corridor that is real, and a technology that's real. We were able to take folks from across the corridor, including Dominic from SBC, to see this technology. Frankly, I don't know if this technology will be fully commercialized in 2 years or 20, but it was pretty exciting to see it in action. They're hiring really smart people from NASA and other places from the private sector and have hundreds of $millions of investments in it. So when you're looking at some of the materials for what we produced to win this competition, you see artist renderings and things like that. This is my disclaimer. This is a fantastic technology. These renderings were designed to get us excited about the possibilities. They don't represent actual route locations or actual station locations. So if you happen to own the property in Pittsburgh that overlooks that, it's a possibility, but we're just getting to that part. As an MPO, we wanted to get down to looking at the deep dive of the technology, and we're pretty excited about the approach that we announced last month, which we're calling the Rapid Speed Transportation Initiative. Notice it doesn't say Hyperloop Transportation Initiative. So what we want to do is we want to look at two major possibilities connect Pittsburgh, Columbus, and Chicago. We want to look at passenger rail, which is an existing technology and it's proven, and we want to look at Hyperloop, which is one that is coming at us quickly, and we have the attention of one of the global leaders in the technology. The idea is to do a study at the same time, so to look at a Hyperloop feasibility study along the route, and also to advance what we call components of a Tier 1 environmental impact study. The idea here is the only corridor in the country that's looking at this, looking at Hyperloop in the context of rail, so that whether or not Hyperloop is a technology ready in 2 years, perhaps we can advance high-speed passenger rail that much quicker. I know that sounds like a conservative Midwestern approach, like we want to be reaching for the stars while we keep our feet on the ground. But quite frankly, with a technology like this, as exciting and transformative as it is, honestly, if we could get to Pittsburgh through improvements to rail of passenger and freight much, much faster, that'd have huge economic benefit for us too. So just a couple other quick things about the case that we made for this corridor. So to win this global competition, we had to prove that this was a corridor worth investing in to this global company. Petra talked about it as a hotbed of innovation, whether it's different types of manufacturing, whether it's corporate headquarters, whether it's educational leaders like Carnegie Mellon or Ohio State, or you can name them up and down the region. This is something that we have a corridor that is densely rich in assets that if you were looking at a Hyperloop investment, where to make it, where to hire graduates to work on it, this is the corridor that you look at. We're an MPO, and so we do transportation modeling, and so for us, we wanted to look at passenger flows. So looking at these three regions of Pittsburgh, Columbus, and Chicago right now, Pittsburgh and Columbus don't have a lot of passenger traffic between it. We actually don't have any direct air service. The idea of adding something like high-speed rail, or in this case, Hyperloop, could significantly tie our two regions together and open up a pathway to economic possibilities and other possibilities, even looking at your airport and the international flights out of Pittsburgh, international flights out of Chicago and Columbus. When we're passengers, we look to those two areas as places we drive to. If we had access to the amenities you had there, we think it could benefit the entire corridor. Freight is a big component that we advocated for too. Again, we don't have significant freight flows between Pittsburgh and Columbus when it comes to rail. Chicago is a major hub, Columbus has a major international freight airport, and Pittsburgh is a major freight hub. They're not very well connected, and so adding Hyperloop, connecting that time down to be so quick, we could almost function as one region, one corridor, and that could have major economic benefits. So this is where we are. The takeaways are this regional, Rapid Speed Transportation Initiative, which includes Hyperloop and rail, we think is a common sense approach to move forward in analysis of this technology. I want to make sure you know how excited we are about Hyperloop, but also that we're looking at how can we look at existing technologies and move both forward at the same time. The study we have is funded by a range of partners, local governments, the state of Ohio DOT, Indiana and others are investing in this along with the private sector. And we're hoping to pick a consultant here in May and move this along. We are going to invite SBC and MPOs up and down the region to participate in this. There's a national level working group looking at the technology and how to invest in it. We've got you involved in that too. And so this is something we'll be talking about a lot more soon. And if you want to know more, I think we have packets at the tables. It's got all the information. My Transportation Director, Theo Walsh, is here too, and we're both happy to answer questions. Thanks for having us.
Mark, Petra, Bill, thank you very much for that information and the presentation. We're not going to have time, but trying to keep on schedule. We're not going to have time for questions now, but my understanding they will be around for any questions you may need to ask later. What we're going to do now, we're going to break for lunch. We have a great buffet, and as I'm telling you, the cuisine here in California is pretty good. It's going to be a buffet style out in the hallway. And then we just bring it back in here, and we'll have about 25 or 30 minutes, and then Stan Caldwell will do a presentation while we're eating lunch. So again, if you could get your meal, and then we can work our way back in here, and we'll have time to eat it, and then we'll get started, try to get started around 1 o'clock.